When my son took my pension check in his hands, glanced at the amount, and coldly declared, "This is your rent," I felt something inside me collapse. He left me with only $17 after 40 years of sweat sacrifice and loyalty to a family I thought would one day take care of me, as I had cared for them. Instead of support, I was handed a bill. Instead of gratitude, I was handed humiliation. The betrayal of my own flesh and blood was a wound deeper than any illness, heavier than any burden I had carried in my lifetime. But everything changed 3 months later when the tables turned and Michael was forced to pay me. And when that moment came, you won't believe what I did. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Michael's fist slammed against the dinner table so violently that the dishes rattled. Emma's milk glass toppled over white liquid, running across the wood like spilled innocence. The twins froze mid-bite, their chicken nuggets abandoned their young faces pale as they stared at the storm rising in their father's eyes. "Dad, you can't do this. We need your money." Michael's voice cracked, desperation lacing every syllable. His neatly pressed shirt was wrinkled, his carefully combed hair now falling across his forehead, giving him the look of a man unraveling. I straightened in my chair. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing my calm, steady tone in the quiet of my room. This confrontation wasn't sudden. No, this had been building since Christmas, when I had watched Michael count through my pension like a hungry wolf tallying its prey. 40 years of hard work is enough," I said firmly. "I've earned my rest." The words hung heavy in the air, mixing with the smell of Sarah's meatloaf and the metallic tension that seemed to press down on everyone's shoulders. Through the frost-covered window, February winds rattled the glass, but inside the house it felt even colder. Sarah's fork trembled as she set it down gently. Her nervous laugh tried to pierce the silence, but it died in her throat. "Maybe we should discuss this after dinner." But Michael wasn't finished. His chair scraped violently against the linoleum as he stood towering over the small table. His shadow loomed across the plates like a threat. "Dad, listen to me carefully," he said, jabbing his finger in my direction. "The mortgage is due next week. Emma needs dental work. Ethan's soccer registration costs $300. Do you think your little Social Security check will cover all that?" His voice rose higher, sharper, filling the kitchen with panic. I saw Emma's lower lip tremble as she reached for her brother's hand beneath the table. Ethan squeezed back, trying to comfort her, while their father raged above them. These children, innocent, fragile, shouldn't have been witnesses to this war. But Michael didn't care anymore. Desperation had stripped away whatever paternal instincts he once had. "Son," I said slowly, deliberately, "you have no right to tell me what to do with my life." The words struck him like a slap. His face twisted, shock, rage, then a cold calculation that made me think uncomfortably of his mother in her cruelest moments. "No right," he spat, his laugh bitter, hollow. He flung his arms wide, mockingly, theatrical. "I have every right. This is my house now. Remember, you signed it over to me 2 years ago for tax purposes, you said. That means if you stop working, you'll pay rent to stay here." The kitchen seemed to shrink. The walls pressed closer. Emma started crying softly, her tears streaking down her cheeks while Ethan wrapped an arm around her. Sarah's face had gone ghostly pale, her loyalty clearly torn. She glanced at me, her father-in-law, who had welcomed her with open arms, and then at her husband, whose temper was destroying the very family he claimed to protect. "Michael, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. But there was no strength in it, no shield for me. I pushed back my chair slowly, the weight of 65 years pressing down on my joints. Age had taught me the wisdom of choosing my battles, of knowing when to stand and when to retreat. Tonight, I realized, was not about winning the argument. It was about preserving the strength for what would come next. "I'll be filing my retirement papers tomorrow," I said evenly. Without another glance at the wreckage of my family sitting around that table, I rose. I passed by my son's stunned, furious face, took my winter coat from the closet, and opened the front door. The slam echoed like a gunshot through the house. Outside, Detroit's February night swallowed me whole. Bitter air stung my lungs, my breath curling in clouds as I walked down Oak Street with no destination. Behind me, Michael's muffled shouts rose again, but the distance turned them into meaningless noise. The streetlights cast long shadows across the snow, stretching thin and fragile, like the ties of family that had nearly broken me. At dawn, I woke in my small bedroom to silence. No shouts, no banging fists. Just silence. But Michael's words lingered, echoing in my head, a reminder of the battle still ahead. And as the gray morning light crept across the frozen city, I understood something with painful clarity. The time for submission was over. The time for rebuilding had begun. I dressed quietly that morning, careful not to wake anyone. The weight of decision heavy on my shoulders, yet strangely comforting. Pulling on my warmest sweater, I reached for the manila folder that had sat on my nightstand for weeks. My lifeline, my proof, my final act of courage. The bus schedule was folded neatly inside alongside documents chronicling 40 years of sweat, steel, and sacrifice at Ford Motor Company. Today wasn't just paperwork, it was liberation. The DOT bus arrived right on time at 8:15, its diesel growl echoing through the still frozen streets of Detroit. As I climbed aboard, the driver gave me a polite nod, and I made my way down the narrow aisle. An elderly woman with a walking cane met my eyes and smiled warmly as I settled into the seat across from her. "Cold morning," she said, tugging her scarf tighter around her neck. "But spring will come eventually." Her words landed in me like prophecy. Spring would come not just to Detroit, but to me. This wasn't only about weather. It was about survival renewal, the promise that winter, no matter how brutal, could never last forever. I stared out the grimy window as the city passed by abandoned lots where weeds grew, wild brick factories, standing like ghosts of a prouder era, and yet here and there signs of rebirth, young parents holding children's hands, construction workers raising steel beams toward the sky. Detroit had survived bankruptcy and decay. Perhaps I could too. At the McNamara Federal Building, security guards asked me to remove my belt and shoes. The metal detector beeped, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and for a fleeting moment I felt both important and exposed, just another aging man navigating the system, but also a citizen reclaiming his rights. Rows of seniors waited in plastic chairs, each clutching their own manila folders, each wearing the same mixture of hope and fatigue etched into their faces. My name was finally called. "James Wilson," a voice said. I looked up to see a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and a professional smile. "I'm Clark Johnson. Thank you for waiting. Please follow me." Her office was small but welcoming, family photographs on the desk, children's drawings, pinned on the corkboard behind her, a tiny plant reaching for the thin sunlight through the blinds. She gestured for me to sit. "Let's begin with Form SSA-1, she said, gently sliding papers toward me. "This is your application for retirement insurance benefits. And since you're applying before full retirement age, we'll also need Form SSA-38, the disability report." At first, the stack of forms felt overwhelming, the language dense, the checkboxes endless. But Clark explained each section with patience, her voice steady and reassuring. When she reached my employment record, she looked impressed. 40 years with Ford. "That's remarkable, Mr. Wilson. Very few people show that kind of loyalty anymore." "Finally, I'll be free," I whispered before I could stop myself. The words carried a tremor, too raw, too revealing. Clark paused, her eyes softening with recognition. She'd heard this before, I was sure, stories of men and women whose golden years were tarnished by family conflict, children who saw their parents not as elders to honor, but as accounts to plunder. I didn't explain further. I couldn't. I simply nodded when she asked family pressures. My phone buzzed again and again on the desk between us. Michael's name lit up the screen like a warning flare. I ignored it, each call another attempt to drag me back into his world of desperation and manipulation. When the last signature was done, Clark gathered the documents neatly. "Processing typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. Your first payment should arrive by mid-May, assuming everything moves smoothly." I thanked her, shaking her hand as though she were a priestess granting absolution. The bus ride home felt different. The same bleak cityscape rolled past, but my chest felt lighter, as if I'd put down a burden I hadn't realized was crushing me. The folder on my lap was more than paper. It was dignity, independence, the first step back toward the man I'd been before fear and obligation chained me. When I opened the front door, Michael was waiting, his posture rigid, his jaw tight, eyes filled with a storm he could no longer control. Anger flickered across his face, but behind it, something deeper, wounded pride, disbelief that his father had dared to say no. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I said nothing. My silence carried more weight than any argument. Something in my eyes must have warned him further words would be useless. He turned sharply and retreated into his home office, where soon I heard the muffled sound of phone calls, his voice tense as he discussed refinancing options, second mortgages plans that no longer involved me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the safety net. I was my own man again. Over the following weeks, I shaped a new rhythm for my life, one built on patience, quiet anticipation, and small but deliberate acts of preparation. Each morning began the same way, a cup of coffee steaming gently in my weathered hands, the bitter taste waking me fully before I pulled on my jacket and made the short walk down the driveway to the mailbox. It had become more than a routine. It was a daily ritual, a ceremony of hope. Most days only bills and advertisements awaited me, but I checked anyway, believing that someday soon the envelope I longed for would arrive. Afternoons I spent walking the neighborhood, hands tucked in my pockets, eyes lingering on the homes with for rent signs planted firmly in their lawns. Each one represented a possibility, a doorway to freedom. I memorized addresses, imagined which rooms would catch the morning light, which porches might hold me on summer evenings, with a glass of sweet tea in hand. The dream of independence carried me forward step by step, block by block. Evenings were quieter. I sat on the edge of my bed, pulling open the drawer of my old dresser, where, hidden behind fading photographs of Mary, I kept the modest pile of bills I'd been saving. I'd take them out, lay them on the bedspread, and count carefully once, twice, sometimes 3 times before sliding them back into their hiding place. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Each dollar represented endurance, patience, and the promise of a future I was determined to claim. The waiting tested me. It gnawed at my resolve some nights, but it also forged something stronger inside me. Michael tried again and again to wear me down with arguments and guilt, his words sharpened by his own desperation. But the more he pressed, the more I understood my freedom was worth every sacrifice, every ounce of discomfort. And then came May 15th. The morning dawned bright and gentle, the kind of spring day Detroiters treasure, because it feels like the earth itself is apologizing for winter's cruelty. The air carried warmth, soft enough to lift my spirit before I'd even poured my coffee. As I walked to the mailbox, something in my chest told me today was different. Nestled between grocery flyers and utility bills there, it was an envelope stamped with the seal of the Social Security Administration. My heart stuttered in my chest. My hands trembled as I carried it back inside, retreating to the privacy of my bedroom. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and carefully tore it open. The check slid into my hands, $1,847, neatly printed with my name, James Edward Wilson. For a long moment, I could only stare. My calculations over the past months had been cautious, conservative. But this was more than I dared to hope for. "This is mine," I whispered into the empty room, voice breaking with something between relief and triumph. "Earned through 40 years of honest labor. No one can take this from me." The walk to Chase Bank on Woodward Avenue felt almost ceremonial. Every step lighter, every breath freer. I kept touching the pocket where I'd tucked the check, reassuring myself it was still there. Gone was the heavy winter coat that had shielded me through long, bitter months. Today I wore only a light jacket, and it felt like a symbol, like I'd shrugged off the weight of years of burden. Inside the bank, familiar faces greeted me. Jennifer Lee, my teller for nearly 15 years, looked up from her desk, her smile genuine and warm. "Mr. Wilson," she said brightly, "it's good to see you. How are you today?" "Better than I've been in months," I replied, sliding the check through the glass. "I'd like to cash this, please." Her eyes widened slightly as she read the amount and saw the Social Security designation. "Congratulations on your retirement, Mr. Wilson. You've certainly earned it." The counting machine hummed, spitting out crisp bills in neat stacks of hundreds, 50s, and 20s. The sound was more than mechanical. It was a song, a rhythm of liberation. When Jennifer handed me the thick manila envelope, I held it reverently, feeling its weight press reassuringly against my palm. On the walk home, the city seemed brighter, friendlier. I stopped at a payphone outside the corner grocery store, unable to contain the joy swelling inside me. I dialed Frank Thompson, my oldest friend, the man who'd known me through every hardship. "Frank," I said the moment he answered, my voice lighter than it had been in years, "I'm finally free." "You got it, James." His voice was eager, hopeful for me. "I did. $1,847. More than enough to start fresh." Back home, I locked my bedroom door, placed the envelope on the dresser, and carefully counted the bills again. Twice then, a third time. When I finally hid them beneath the box of Mary's letters, I felt her presence as if she were standing behind me, her hand on my shoulder steady and approving. That night I cooked myself a simple dinner roast chicken and potatoes and ate it in quiet peace at the kitchen table. The house was unusually calm. Michael buried himself in his office, making frantic phone calls about refinancing and second mortgages. Sarah busied herself with the twins, their laughter faint from the living room. For once, no one bothered me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living, reclaiming, piece by piece, the freedom I had thought was lost forever. Before bed, I let myself peek one last time at the envelope tucked beneath the sweaters, the money resting like a secret heartbeat only I could hear. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new doubts, but tonight belonged to quiet triumph. 40 years of sweat of alarms before sunrise, of aching muscles and loyal service, all of it had finally crystallized into freedom I could touch with my fingertips. No one could take that away from me. Not anymore. Sleep swept over me like a blanket, soft and reassuring. And for the first time in months, my dreams weren't filled with worries, but with wide horizons. Apartments with sunny windows, grocery lists I wrote for myself. Long walks with no one waiting to ask where I'd been. Independence wrapped around me more securely than any pillow. And when I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains in golden stripes that painted the carpet like a promise. Yesterday's victory still hummed inside my chest, a warmth that carried me from bed to dresser with a smile. $1.847 in crisp bills, my reward, my lifeline hidden safely where no one could reach. Today was supposed to be the beginning. I could feel it in the morning air and the birdsong outside and the rhythm of my own pulse. Today was for planning, for imagining, for the first real step toward building a life that belonged only to me. The dresser drawer opened with its familiar squeak sweaters stacked neatly like obedient guards. I pulled them back, heart quickening with anticipation. Empty. Where neat stacks of bills should have waited, there was only bare wood and silence. My eyes refused to believe it at first, darting frantically across the empty space. A lonely crumpled $10 bill and a scatter of coins clinked against the side as I shook the drawer in disbelief. $17, that was all. No. No, impossible. I whispered, my voice cracking, as if saying the word might undo the reality staring back at me. I shoved the drawer closed and yanked it open again. Still nothing. My breath quickened into ragged gasps as I ripped sweaters apart, shook every fold, searched every seam. Gone. Every dollar gone. Desperation surged like wildfire. I tore through the dresser, scattering socks and underwear across the floor. Mary's photographs, those precious ghosts of the past, fluttered down like autumn leaves as I yanked open drawers, shoved aside frames, pressed my hands beneath the mattress, into closet corners, behind every shadow where hope might still hide. Nothing. Empty. The silence of theft mocked me at every turn. The window lock was untouched. The screen remained whole. No shattered glass, no forced entry. Whoever had done this hadn't broken in. They'd walked in, quietly, confidently, like they belonged. My hands trembled as the truth began to settle heavy and merciless. It wasn't some faceless thief. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It was someone here, someone who knew exactly where to look, someone who lived under this very roof. Michael. His name surged unbidden to my lips like poison. He knew about the money he'd fought me over. It demanded it. And when persuasion failed, had he simply decided to take it by force to strip away the freedom I had fought to claim? The phone sat on the nightstand inches away, glowing faintly with missed calls. Police, I thought. Report the theft. But my hand froze midair, the weight of family crushing the instinct. To call the police would mean to admit what I already feared, that my own son had crossed a line no father ever wants to believe possible. From downstairs, life carried on as if nothing had shattered. Coffee percolating, dishes clinking, the cheerful rise and fall of children's voices. The house breathing with the rhythm of routine while my world fractured upstairs. I forced my legs to move every step down the staircase, pounding like a drumbeat of dread. The kitchen unfolded before me in its ordinary morning theater. Sarah at the counter, buttering toast, Emma and Ethan bent over cereal bowls, with backpacks ready at their sides, and Michael, calm, composed, sitting with the Detroit Free Press, folded in his hands, steam curling from his coffee. "Morning, Dad," he said casually, eyes flicking up from the newsprint, his voice as smooth as any other day. "Sleep well." I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the pathetic $17 in my fist, my breath shallow and ragged. "Michael," I said, my voice breaking, "we've been robbed. My money, it's gone." Sarah's hand froze midair, her coffee cup trembling. The children's spoons clinked softly as they paused, sensing the storm beneath the surface. The air itself seemed to tighten. Michael didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he folded the newspaper slowly, deliberately, the sound of the paper crackling sharp as a blade. He set it down neatly beside his plate, lifted his coffee, and met my gaze with eyes that were colder than winter. "Nobody robbed us, Dad," he said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I took your money." The words didn't just strike my ears, they tore through me like fists, each syllable a brutal punch to the ribs. For a moment I couldn't even breathe. Across the table, Emma's lip trembled. Then the tears came, small sobs muffled behind her tiny hands. Ethan slid lower and lower in his chair, shrinking into himself, wishing he could vanish into the floorboards. Children should never see this, I thought. Not their grandfather being humiliated, not their father turning into a monster. Sarah's porcelain coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. Her hands shook, her face pale, lips pressed together, as though holding back words that might shatter the fragile air between us. But she said nothing. Fear or complicity sealed her silence. My voice cracked raw with disbelief. Why? Why would you do this without my permission?" Michael rose slowly like a storm building on the horizon. His sighs filled the kitchen, a shadow blotting out all warmth. And then he smiled. Not a son's smile, not even a man's, but the cold, calculating curve of a predator sizing up wounded prey. "You didn't listen to me," he said, voice steady, smooth, terrifying in its certainty. "Remember dinner? Remember when I told you what would happen if you retired? Well, here we are." From his pocket, he drew a thick wad of bills. My bills. My hard-earned money. He flipped through them carelessly, the green edges fanning out like feathers, then plucked a few free and extended them toward me. "Rent," he said simply. "You live under my roof, you pay. From now on, I'll be handling your pension payments. You'll get $20 a week for personal expenses." He tossed the words like scraps to a begging dog. The injustice slammed into me with full force, a tidal wave of fury and heartbreak. "This is my money," I choked out. "You're stealing from me. You're a thief." Michael's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped low and dangerous. "Watch your tone." He shoved the bills toward me again, contempt dripping from every gesture. $20. And don't forget, you don't pay for food, or lights, or this house. My house, I shot back, heat flooding my veins. I paid for this place. 30 years of mortgage, sweat, and sacrifice. It's mine. He leaned forward, towering, his whisper sharp as a knife. "Prove it. In court. Old man." For the first time, Sarah found her voice fragile and wavering. "Michael, maybe we should stay out of this." "Sarah." The command cut through the air like a whip. She froze instantly, her eyes dropping to the table, lips pressed into silence once again. Emma's sobs grew louder, raw and painful. Ethan stared at his cereal, eyes wide, tears dripping into the milk he couldn't bring himself to touch. Their small, trembling shoulders carved my heart open. They were watching cruelty performed in real time, watching their father strip their grandfather of dignity, teaching them that power was cruelty and love was weakness. And Michael calmly tucked the stolen bills back into his pocket and sat down again, resuming his breakfast, as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Fork to eggs, sip of coffee, rustle of newspaper. Normalcy built on ash. "20 a week, Dad," he said casually, chewing like we were discussing the weather. "Take it, or find another roof." The ultimatum poisoned the room. My chest burned with rage, steam, and an overheated boiler, but I held myself upright, refusing to break in front of him. Not yet. The children needed escape. I glanced at Emma, her tearful eyes locked on me, and whispered across the chaos, "I'm sorry you have to see this." Sarah moved quickly, then ushering them toward the hallway, their backpacks clutched tight like shields. Emma looked back once, her face pale with fear and confusion, before disappearing through the doorway. My heart cracked at the sight. Michael never looked up, never faltered. He finished his breakfast slowly, theatrically wiped his mouth with a napkin, and checked his watch. Papers were gathered, jacket, smooth leather briefcase lifted. That briefcase, expensive, professional polished, shone like a symbol of everything he claimed to have built, though I knew the foundation had been mine. He kissed Sarah perfunctorily on the cheek, the gesture grotesque in its normalcy, then strode to the front door. "Think about my offer," he said, voice carrying through the house. 20 a week is more than most nursing homes give. You should be thanking me." The door slammed behind him. His car engine roared to life. A minute later, silence pressed down heavy and suffocating. I waited 10 long minutes, letting the stillness wrap around me, letting my fury simmer into something colder, sharper. Then I rose. Michael's bedroom sat just down the hall. Its door was ajar, unlocked, careless. Maybe he thought his father too weak, too broken to fight back. Maybe he believed humiliation had finished me. But his briefcase sat waiting on the dresser, unlatched, a dark invitation gleaming in the dim morning light. Inside Michael's briefcase, hidden beneath a stack of neatly organized insurance forms and crisp business contracts, lay a manila envelope. My fingers trembled as I slid it free, already sensing the weight of betrayal inside. When I pulled back the flap, my breath caught. Cash. Thick, familiar bundles. My money drained from my pension while I slept upstairs, blind and trusting. The violation seared through me like fire in the veins. I spread the bills across the dresser, counting each one with deliberate care. $1,630. That's what remained after Michael's so-called allowance of $20. $20 he tossed at me like a bone to a starving dog. I counted again, slower this time, fixing the number into memory. Not just for proof, but as a marker of the injustice. Then with a steady hand, I slid the bills into my shirt pocket. The fabric stretched against my chest, and for the first time that morning, I felt something close to control return. Let him come home and feel what I felt. Let him walk through that door and discover emptiness where his power used to sit. Let him know the taste of violation. Upstairs I packed. The suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a heavy thud, the sound echoing through the room like finality. I packed quickly but carefully, shirts, trousers, socks, shoes, essentials only. My identification, my bank documents tucked safely between folded clothes. And then my hand lingered on the small silver frame atop my nightstand. Mary's photograph, her smile gentle, kind, eternal, looked back at me as though reminding me of the man I once was, the man she had loved. I slipped the picture into my jacket pocket close against my heart, where she had always belonged. Everything else, the furniture worn with memory, the shelves of books, the little comforts of a life built over decades, remained behind. They were no longer mine. I snapped the suitcase closed, the metallic click ringing like a gavel. That was when Sarah appeared in the doorway. For a moment, she looked almost like the young woman who had once brought warmth into Michael's life, her face softened, stripped of pretenses, etched with something that might have been guilt or sorrow. "James," her voice cracked, fragile. "Please, don't go. Maybe we can work something out with Michael." I met her eyes. "Your husband is a thief, Sarah. There's nothing to work out." Her hands twisted nervously in front of her, as though wringing invisible cloth. She trailed me down the stairs, her words tumbling in frantic whispers, compromises, explanations, excuses that failed to touch the truth. This wasn't about money anymore. It had never really been about money. This was about dignity, about respect, about my right after 4 decades of work and sacrifice to live without being treated like a burden. I opened the front door. Oak Street lay bathed in spring sunshine, the world unshaken by my private collapse. Children laughed in front yards. Mothers pegged sheets to clotheslines, their arms moving with the timeless rhythm of domestic life. Gardens bloomed. Lawns hummed with sprinklers. Life went on, indifferent. I stepped outside, suitcase rolling behind me across the cracked sidewalk. The house I had built, the home I had paid for brick by brick, shrank behind me with every step. I didn't look back. Couldn't. 3 blocks away stood the Detroit Inn, its weathered brick facade leaning slightly toward the street, the painted sign promising weekly rates, cash only. Inside, the air smelled of age and survival. The desk clerk, a heavy man with half-moon glasses, didn't even lift his eyes from his newspaper when I slid $45 across the scarred counter. He pushed a brass key toward me, dangling from a plastic diamond stamped 127. The lock clicked, the door swung inward, and I stepped into a room that smelled faintly of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. The carpet was thin, the curtains faded, but the bed stood clean and waiting. And for the first time in years, the space was mine. I set my scuffed suitcase on the narrow motel table, its legs wobbling under the weight, and lowered myself onto the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked beneath me, and in that moment, I felt all 65 of my years pressing down on my shoulders, seeping into my bones like winter cold. From my wallet, Mary's photograph slipped free as though she too needed to breathe. I held it in my hands, tracing the curve of her smile with my thumb. 8 years had passed since her funeral, yet her face had never left me. Even during the cancer treatments, when her body weakened day by day, she had held on to her dignity like a final gift. She'd smiled through agony, carried grace in the very moment when everything else was crumbling. I had promised myself to honor her memory with the same dignity. But tonight, staring at her face in this lonely room, my voice broke. "Mary," I whispered, my throat tightening, "our son has become a monster." The words hung in the stale air, mingling with the faint rumble of trucks along 8 Mile Road outside. I could almost hear her silence, the way she used to listen, before giving me the kind of answer that made everything bearable. But no answer came, only the truth I already knew. How had Michael changed so completely, from the boy who'd clung to me, sobbing on the night you passed, to the man who now stole my pension without conscience, without even shame? My mind pulled me backward toward memories I had long kept locked away. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts at the Ford plant during his senior year of high school, stumbling home with grease under my nails and exhaustion in every joint, but determined. Determined to save enough for his college tuition. Determined that his life would not be bound by the same hard limitations that had bound mine. The guidance counselor had said Michael showed real promise in business management, that he just needed the chance. And so I had sold my Buick, the one thing I'd ever owned that gave me pride, and took the bus to work for 2 long years. Each sacrifice felt worth it because I believed in him. I believed in us. Tucked behind Mary's picture was another photograph, Michael in his graduation gown, cap tilted slightly, his grin wide as he stood beside me. That day had been my reward. I had worked overtime through countless winters, saved every penny so he could stand there and smile like that. I'd even bought him a used Honda, dependable and clean, so he could drive to job interviews in confidence. That was supposed to be the start of his future. And for a time it seemed like he was grateful. When Mary fell sick, he was there at first. He carried her bags, picked up groceries, even sat by her bed now and then. But as the bills multiplied and my savings dwindled, his visits became shorter, his excuses longer. He seemed always in a hurry, eager to leave, as though her suffering and my burden were inconveniences he couldn't afford. After the funeral, his mask slipped completely. He told me kindly at first that maybe I should sell the house, move into senior housing. He said it would be for my own good, but instead I trusted him with something greater. I signed the deed to the house over to his name, believing it was a smart move for tax purposes, believing he would honor my trust, believing always that blood and sacrifice meant loyalty. What a fool I had been. Now here I sat in a cheap motel room, with peeling wallpaper, with only $630 to my name, while my son slept soundly in the very house I had worked 40 years to pay for. The injustice scalded me, a bitter acid burning in my chest, eating through grief, and leaving behind something harder, something sharper. I spread the cash out on the table, the bills fanning beneath my shaking hands. I counted them once, then again, $1,630 after paying for tonight's room. Enough for a few weeks, maybe longer if I was careful, maybe longer still if I moved somewhere cheaper. But the truth sank in as I stacked the bills into neat piles. This wasn't about money anymore. It had never just been about money. This was about dignity, about the right to live without fear in the years I had left, about consequences, enough being the victim. As dawn crept through the thin curtains, painting the motel wall, a weary gold, I made my decision. Tomorrow I would not sit idle. Tomorrow I would look for allies. Somewhere in this city, there had to be people who understood what it meant to be stripped bare by those you love most. The next morning, the Detroit Public Library's computer terminal hummed softly as I typed, the fluorescent lights flickering above. It didn't take long. On Grasset Avenue, the Senior Support Center offered free legal consultations for elderly residents facing financial abuse. Their website told stories raw, painful, familiar of parents betrayed by their children of pension checks, siphoned away of homes signed over under false promises. Reading their words was like staring into a mirror. Each line carved deeper proof that I was not alone. My shame began to lift, replaced by resolve. 2 days later, I stood outside their modest brick building, the manila folder clutched under my arm. Inside it lay every document I could gather, the original deed mortgage papers, bank statements showing every pension deposit, proof of a life worked for, proof of a life stolen. I drew a deep breath, feeling Mary's photo against my chest like a silent blessing. Then I stepped inside. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the reception desk, the manila folder tucked under my arm, feeling heavier than it should have. "James Wilson to see Elizabeth Harris," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have a 10-hour appointment." The receptionist, a kindly woman in her 50s with soft eyes, looked up from her computer and offered me a warm smile that felt like a small mercy. "She'll be right with you, Mr. Wilson. Can I get you some coffee or tea while you wait?" I shook my head politely and lowered myself into one of the comfortable chairs along the wall. My knees cracked as I sat, the weight of 65 years settling into me. Across the room, a potted fern thrived in the morning sunlight, a small reminder that even in strange places, life persisted. 5 minutes later, Elizabeth Harris appeared from a side office. She was in her mid-40s, professional, in a navy suit, her stride brisk, her handshake firm. Sharp eyes studied me with a mix of compassion and determination, a balance that spoke of long experience. Her office walls told her story law degrees from Wayne State certificates in elder advocacy framed newspaper articles about community work. This was a woman who fought battles on behalf of people like me and won. "Tell me what's been happening, Mr. Wilson," she said, motioning for me to sit across from her polished desk. I began carefully, as if each word were another piece of evidence. From my retirement decision to signing over the deed in blind trust to the morning in the kitchen when I discovered my savings had been stolen by the son I had once carried on my shoulders. Elizabeth didn't interrupt. She listened with quiet intensity, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving quickly, her eyes never losing focus. When I finished, she reached for the folder in my lap. "May I examine your documents?" I handed it over, the papers inside feeling like fragments of my shattered life. She spread them out with practiced precision. The house deed caught her attention immediately. She studied the lines carefully, her brow furrowing as she tapped something into her computer. Her eyebrows lifted. She turned the monitor slightly toward herself, scanning what appeared on the screen. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Wilson," she said firmly, "the house is registered in your name. You are the sole owner. Michael has no legal claim to it whatsoever." The words struck me like a bolt of lightning, half relief, half disbelief. "But he's been living there since Mary passed," I murmured. "Over 10 years. She shook her head. "That gives him residency, but not ownership. What he did, stealing your money, manipulating the deed, taking advantage of your trust, fits the definition of financial exploitation of an elderly person. And in Michigan, that is not just wrong, Mr. Wilson. It's a crime." She leaned forward, her eyes unflinching, her voice weighted with authority. "Under MCL 750-174A, anyone who exploits the assets of a vulnerable adult can face criminal charges and civil liability. Your son is guilty of elder financial abuse." The legal terminology washed over me like cold water jarring cleansing. For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me. "Hope. You mean," my voice cracked, "you mean I still have rights?" "Absolutely," she said without hesitation. "You have more rights than you realize. We can demand eviction compensation for damages and even retroactive rent for the years he has lived there. Your son has been stealing from you, plain and simple. The law will not protect him. It will protect you." Her words were both balm and fire. The part of me that still remembered Michael as a boy flinched, but the man in me, the father who had sacrificed everything, felt the truth of her statement. Elizabeth began pulling forms from her desk drawer, laying them in neat stacks. "The first step will be a formal demand letter. We'll require that he vacate the premises within 30 days and compensate you for the stolen funds. We'll send it by certified mail so there is a legal record. If he refuses to comply, we'll escalate criminal charges and civil recovery. For the next hour, the office became a whirlwind of pens, scratching documents, sliding terms explained in patient but firm tones. She walked me through every stage, the demand, the waiting period, the potential courtroom battle. This process takes time, Elizabeth warned. Your son may hire an attorney, he may resist eviction, he may try to intimidate you. But you are not alone, Mr. Wilson. Michigan law takes elder abuse seriously. As she sealed the demand letter in an official envelope, she paused. Are you prepared for what could be a long, difficult fight? I thought of Mary's photograph in my wallet. I thought of my Buick sold to send Michael to college. I thought of 40 winters of overtime shifts so he could graduate with pride. And I thought of that casual cruelty at the breakfast table, his cold eyes, as he stripped me of everything I had earned. I met Elizabeth's gaze with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I've been preparing for this fight my whole life, I said quietly. I just didn't know it until now. The following morning, we stood side by side at the main post office on 4th Street. The air smelled of paper and ink bureaucracy moving with its usual indifferent rhythm. The clerk, a man in his 60s, processed the certified mail with meticulous precision, affixing tracking numbers and return receipt requests. I slid the postal fees across the counter and watched as the thick envelope bearing Michael's name and my old address was stamped and sealed into the system. Make sure he signs for it personally, I instructed. My voice was steel now. I want proof he received every word. For the first time in a long while, I walked away, not as a victim, but as a man reclaiming his life. 4 days had slipped by since my consultation with Elizabeth, days that felt like both a blur and a quiet awakening. In that time, I'd managed to find a small studio apartment in Corktown. $600 a month. Not cheap, but manageable with my pension. The space itself wasn't much, just a narrow galley kitchen, a single window that faced west toward downtown, and a mattress that squeaked when I shifted my weight. Yet for the first time in years, it was mine. No one barged in. No one sighed when I boiled water too loudly. No one made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own life. It offered something the Oak Street house never had: complete control, complete peace. 4 walls that didn't judge me, didn't betray me. I was learning brick by brick what independence meant when you'd already lived 65 years and thought you'd earned the right to rest. Elizabeth had drafted the demand letter with surgical precision, every paragraph like a blade pressed to Michael's inflated sense of entitlement. Reading it the night before mailing was like holding a loaded weapon I never thought I'd have the courage to use. The letter didn't just demand his attention, it promised consequences, real ones. This should reach him by Friday afternoon, the postal worker said, sliding the tracking receipt across the counter. I nodded, pocketing it like a general accepting orders for war. Friday came and went in silence. No phone calls, no knocks on the door. Only the soft hum of my refrigerator and the creak of old pipes to remind me I still existed. Saturday morning, however, brought the return receipt. My heart jolted when I saw the hasty scrawl across the green card, Michael's unmistakable handwriting. Signed at 2:47 p.m., May 25, 2025. Proof that he had held those words in his own hands, that he had felt their weight settle on him, the way winter had settled into my bones. I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table where I once drank coffee every morning, his brow furrowed, his mouth tightening, as the reality of what he'd done began to crush him. His father wasn't broken. His father wasn't powerless. His father had found allies and ammunition. The phone rang at exactly 11:00 a.m. on Saturday. Dad, are you crazy? This is our house. Michael's voice was sharp, defensive, but beneath the bravado was something new. A tremor, a crack in the armor. Panic. No, Michael. This is my house. You have 30 days. You can't do this. I've invested years improving the property, maintaining it, paying utilities. With my money, I cut in, my voice level colder than I'd thought myself capable of. I savored the shift, the power tilting back toward me for once. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every bill mine. You've been living rent-free in a house I bought while draining the retirement I worked 40 years to build. Silence stretched between us. For the first time, he had nothing rehearsed to spit back. Dad. His voice dropped, the bluster evaporating like steam. Let's talk about this reasonably. Maybe we can work out an arrangement. The arrangement, I said slowly, letting every word sink deep, is clearly outlined in the letter. 30 days to vacate, $5,000 in compensation for theft and emotional distress. Keys returned to my attorney. Those terms are not negotiable. 5,000, I don't have that kind of money. Then you shouldn't have stolen mine. This is ridiculous. I'm calling my own lawyer. Good, I replied without hesitation. Mine will enjoy explaining Michigan elder abuse statutes to yours. The line went dead. He'd hung up. But I didn't feel abandoned this time. I didn't feel weak. What filled me instead was a cold, steady satisfaction, like steel cooling into shape. For months I had been scrambling to respond to him, to clean up after his betrayals. Now he was the one scrambling. From my studio window I watched the afternoon sun paint the glass towers of the Renaissance Center in shades of fire and gold. Somewhere across this city my son was staring at the same letter, realizing his father had grown a spine and a legal army behind him. 30 days. That was all he had. Elizabeth's office became a war room in the following days. Her conference table was a battlefield map covered with documents, bank statements, property deeds, copies of every utility bill. She highlighted transactions with ruthless precision. We need to establish a pattern, she explained, her yellow marker gliding over the paper. Not just one bad act, but years of financial abuse. Your pension deposits, his unauthorized withdrawals, the utility payments you made while he claimed ownership. It all tells a story. I sat across from her, watching decades of my labor transform into evidence, not just numbers, but weapons. For the first time in retirement, I had work that mattered. Gathering evidence became my new routine. Dorothy Johnson, my neighbor of 15 years, welcomed me into her kitchen, the smell of percolating coffee and cinnamon rolls softening her sharp words. That boy always yelled at you, Mr. Wilson, she said firmly, her hands trembling slightly as she poured cream into my cup. We heard it through the walls, especially after his mother passed. He never lifted a finger for you. Always you out there in the yard, winter or summer, fixing something while he sat inside with the television blaring. Her indignation gave me strength. Across the street, Frank Martinez leaned against his porch railing, arms folded as he shook his head. Your son treated you like hired help in your own home, he said. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew it. Their words weren't just testimony. They were validation. Proof that I hadn't imagined the abuse. Proof that my suffering had been witnessed. And now, finally, it would be answered. It had made my wife and me sick to watch, but for years we looked the other way, telling ourselves it was family business. Families argued. Families disappointed each other. Families sometimes took advantage. Or so we convinced ourselves. But now, with every statement, every signature, every bank record laid bare, I realized this wasn't just family conflict anymore. It was exploitation, plain and undeniable. Each witness declaration hardened our case like bricks mortared with truth. Yet the financial record struck the hardest blow. There it was in black and white. Michael had siphoned off my pension deposits again and again, treating my hard-earned retirement income as though it were his personal allowance, as though I were little more than a walking bank account. We'll demand not only compensation, but retroactive rent for the last 3 years, Elizabeth announced with her usual calm precision during one strategy session. Her marker underlined numbers like a surgeon cutting through diseased tissue. Market rate for that house is $2,000 a month. That makes $72,000 in back rent alone before we even address theft or damages. The figure stunned even me, $72,000. Nearly half the lifetime savings I'd carefully set aside gone because I couldn't bring myself to enforce boundaries with my own blood. Michael's calls grew more frequent, more frantic as the court date approached. The bravado he'd wielded in the kitchen weeks earlier was crumbling. His attorney had clearly explained the futility of claiming family arrangement without contracts, receipts, or even a shred of evidence. Dad, let's forget this nonsense and talk reasonably. He begged during his latest call, his voice stripped of the swagger I'd grown accustomed to. Come home. We'll work something out. I steadied my voice, unwilling to let guilt creep in. You started this war, son. Now you'll face the consequences. This is insane, he shouted. I improved that property, maintained it for years. With my money. With my tools. I almost laughed at the absurdity. My tools, my wages, my savings, my house. All while living rent-free, I reminded him coldly. Every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every major repair paid for by me. Your lawyer should have explained how weak your position really is. The silence stretched thick and telling. I could hear his breathing through the phone, heavy, uneven, as though the weight of reality was finally pressing down on him. When he spoke again, the arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw desperation. Please, Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. Sarah's pregnant again. We can't afford to move right now. For a heartbeat, that revelation pierced me like ice water. My grandchild, another innocent soul about to be brought into this storm. Old instincts tugged at me, the urge to protect, to forgive, to shoulder the burden yet again. But no. Michael had made his choices long before Sarah's pregnancy. He chose to drain my retirement, to twist my trust into chains, to treat my home like spoils he was entitled to. Fatherhood did not excuse theft. You should have considered your family's needs. I told him quietly, each word like a door closing, before you committed theft and fraud. Elizabeth filed the eviction papers the following Monday. She moved with clinical efficiency, her pen gliding across the forms as though this were any other case. But for me, every signature felt monumental, a declaration that I would no longer be silent, no longer be exploited. The clerk stamped the documents with bureaucratic finality, scheduling our hearing for June 15th. 3 weeks. Enough time for Michael to stew in the reality of consequences. Enough time for me to prepare not just legally but emotionally for the moment justice would finally take my side. Judge Robert Clark's courtroom carried a solemn gravity the morning of our hearing. Polished wood paneling rose like sentinels around us, and portraits of stern-faced jurists seemed to watch from the walls, as though measuring whether I deserved the justice I sought. I straightened my navy blue tie, the same tie I'd worn to Mary's funeral, and felt her presence steady me as I sat beside Elizabeth at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Michael slumped next to his attorney Thomas Chen, a young man clearly out of his depth. Papers shuffled frantically beneath his hands. Whispers hissed urgently into Michael's ear, but the truth sat heavy between them like an immovable stone. My son looked older than his years, eyes bloodshot, shoulders sagging under the weight of sleepless nights. The polished, confident man he once pretended to be had eroded, leaving behind someone desperate and unmoored. Case number 2025 CV 847 Wilson versus Wilson, the bailiff announced with a voice that cracked through the silence like a gavel strike. Eviction proceedings with claims of elder financial abuse. Judge Clark's sharp eyes scanned the documents before him, his expression unreadable yet firm. His voice carried no warmth as he addressed the room. This court recognizes the gravity of these allegations. Financial exploitation of an elderly parent is not a family squabble. It is a crime, and it will be treated as such. For the first time in years, I felt the scales tilt back in my favor. I expect clear evidence and professional conduct from all parties. Judge Clark announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority that hushed even the restless shuffling of papers in the gallery. Elizabeth rose smoothly, her presence calm, yet commanding, every step measured with the certainty of truth on her side. When she spoke, her words cut like a scalpel. Her opening statement was not fiery rhetoric, but a devastatingly precise narrative laying bare the systematic abuse I had endured for 3 long years. She painted the picture with a surgeon's precision bank records, showing my pension checks diverted into accounts Michael controlled, utility bills and tax receipts, with my signature maintenance invoices proving I had funded every repair, every improvement, while Michael posed as the homeowner. The defendant, Elizabeth, declared, her voice steady, but laced with moral fire, has effectively stolen his father's retirement income, forcing him to live as an unpaid tenant in his own home. This is not family squabbling. This is financial exploitation. Her words gave voice to the outrage I had carried in silence. My throat tightened, but I let her speak for me. Witnesses followed each piece of testimony like another nail sealing the coffin of Michael's defense. Sueshi Johnson, our longtime neighbor, spoke with trembling hands but passionate clarity. She described years of hearing Michael's voice raised in rage, the cruel insults hurled at me through thin walls, the way he treated me like a servant rather than the father who had sacrificed his youth, his strength, and his savings for his son's future. The bank manager's testimony was clinical, methodical. He traced the unauthorized withdrawals with charts and records that left no room for denial. The property appraiser followed his calm expertise, establishing the fair market rental value, $2,000 per month, leaving the courtroom buzzing as jurors did the math in their heads. Piece by piece, the structure of truth rose higher, undeniable. Michael had no legal right to occupy my house. He had siphoned money that was not his. He had stolen not just funds, but dignity. Thomas Chen, his young lawyer, stumbled beneath Elizabeth's cross-examination. His attempts at defense grew weaker with every objection sustained. Your Honor, my client has lived in that house for over 10 years, Chen argued desperately, sweat beading at his brow. Surely that establishes some form of tenancy rights. Judge Clark's reply was swift and merciless. Squatters' rights don't apply to family relationships, counselor. Without a rental agreement or documented contributions, your client has been nothing more than a guest who stole from his host. The silence that followed was heavy. When it was my turn to testify, I rose slowly, the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke of 40 years of honest work, the long nights, the sacrifices made so my son could have the education I never did. My hands trembled as I described the betrayal, not just the theft of money, but the theft of trust, the quiet humiliation of living like a stranger in my own home. Michael's testimony sealed his fate. Under Elizabeth's relentless questioning, he admitted withdrawing my pension deposits without permission. He stammered when asked for receipts to prove his supposed contributions. None existed. His voice cracked, then broke completely as he muttered through tears, "I know I should have done better. I know I wasn't grateful." His words, once so full of arrogance, collapsed into sobs that echoed in the chamber. Judge Clark's verdict fell like thunder. His words carried finality, each syllable restoring what had been stripped from me. The evidence unequivocally establishes Mr. James Wilson's ownership of the property. The defendant's actions constitute financial exploitation of an elderly parent under Michigan Statute MCL 750-174A. The court orders eviction within 60 days, compensation of $10,000 for emotional distress, and retroactive rent of $72,000 for 3 years of unauthorized occupancy. The gavel struck. Michael's anguished cry shattered the silence, raw and primal, but no one moved to comfort him. For me, there was no triumph, no celebration, only the quiet satisfaction of justice, long delayed. After months of humiliation, of sleepless nights of betrayal that cut deeper than any wound the law had spoken, my dignity was no longer trampled. My rights had been restored. Weeks later, I stood once again in my kitchen in my house. Morning sunlight poured through the window, gilding the countertops in gold. The hum of the refrigerator, the smell of coffee, even the faint creak of the old floorboards, all of it belonged to me again. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered into the stillness, justice was worth the wait. The morning coffee tasted sweeter than it ever had before, not because of sugar or cream, but because I was finally drinking it in a space that was mine again, free of compromise, free of shadows. The mug felt warm in my hands, the same chipped ceramic one Mary had bought at a roadside fair decades ago. Now, in the quiet of my own kitchen, it seemed to radiate not just heat, but peace. 2 months had passed since Judge Clark's verdict, a verdict that had not only restored my home, but also my dignity. Each month on the first morning, Chase Bank's automated system chimed its cheerful little notification. Transfer received $2,000 from Michael Wilson. The sound was oddly satisfying, like the clear toll of a church bell after a long storm. Justice delivered in installments. Justice punctual, reliable, undeniable. The house itself seemed to breathe again. Where once the walls had felt heavy with Michael's temper and Sarah's silence, now they reflected my choices, my tastes, my history. Fresh paint and soft, welcoming tones brightened the rooms. Mary's photographs, which had been boxed away for years now, occupied places of honor on the walls, smiling faces frozen in time. Reminders of love that had built this home in the first place. The garden outside burst into color tulips and roses she had once adored, blooming under my hands that no longer bore the ache of overtime shifts, but instead the gentle ache of pruning shears and watering cans. Mr. Wilson, another transfer received from Michael Wilson. Jennifer Lee, the cheerful young teller, would announce during my weekly visits to the bank. She always said it with a little smile, as though she too savored the poetry of it. Right on schedule, as usual, I'd reply, signing the deposit slip with a satisfaction that never seemed to dull. Every pen stroke was a reminder that I had survived. that justice, though slow, had come. My retirement, once hijacked and turned into a nightmare of servitude, was blossoming into an unexpected adventure. Florida beckoned with its promise of warm winters and old friends from the Ford plant men who'd retired years before me, who'd been waiting with fishing rods and laughter. Closer to home, the Senior Support Center had opened its doors wide, welcoming my hours of volunteering. Helping other elderly victims navigate the complexities of the legal system gave me purpose. It was more than service, it was redemption, a way of transforming my pain into guidance for others who still struggled. Tuesday evenings found me in a photography classroom at Detroit Community College, finally indulging a passion I'd set aside for 40 years. Carol, my instructor, was endlessly patient, guiding my eye toward the lines of Detroit's rebirth, the gleam of new glass towers rising beside the old brick factories, the resilience of a city scarred but unbroken. "You have a gift for composition," she told me one evening, as we studied the print of a sunset I'd captured over the river. For the first time in years, I believed her. Life opened itself gently like a book I had forgotten to keep reading. Bridge tournaments, book clubs, small dinner parties where laughter replaced tension, all these things wove themselves into my days. Margaret O'Brien, a widow from my photography class, became a frequent companion. We walked through quiet museums together, lingering over art that spoke to us both, and shared afternoons at the Detroit Symphony, where the music seemed to wash years of loneliness away. Her presence was not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something steady, something kind. Then came Labor Day weekend. The phone rang and Michael's voice, halting and subdued, came through the line. "Dad, please forgive me. I understand now what I put you through." For a moment I couldn't speak. I dreamed of hearing those words, but the reality carried both relief and an ache sharper than I'd expected. "You taught me to be strong, Michael," I said quietly. "Now pay for the lesson." "The payments aren't the problem anymore," he admitted, his voice breaking. "It's knowing I destroyed our relationship for money I didn't even need that badly." There was silence between us, then a silence heavy with both loss and possibility. His transformation felt genuine, humbled, stripped of arrogance, but trust was not something that could be rebuilt with apologies. Trust required years. I learned from Sarah later that she had found steady work as a medical receptionist. Their new apartment in Highland Park was modest, just 2 bedrooms and a small balcony, but adequate. The children, my grandchildren, were learning that nothing in life was free, that everything worth having had to be earned. It was a bittersweet comfort. My heart still bore scars, but there was hope that the next generation might grow stronger from the lessons their parents had paid so dearly to learn. As I sat in my garden that evening, coffee cooling beside me, camera resting in my lap, I looked at the roses Mary once loved and thought perhaps life was not about avoiding betrayal or sorrow, but about surviving it and finding on the other side something that still bloomed. "Perhaps we can have coffee sometime," I offered carefully, my voice steady, but my heart cautious. Coffee simple and familiar on neutral ground, where expectation would not hang heavy, where conversation might flow freely without the weight of accusation or apology. "I'd like that, Dad." "I'd like that very much," Michael replied. His words, though brief, carried a sincerity I had not heard from him in years. That evening, as sunlight faded into soft gold across my renovated kitchen, I found myself preparing dinner for one. The counters gleamed, the air smelled faintly of rosemary, and for the first time in decades, the meal before me had been chosen not for its price tag, but for its flavor, its joy. I cooked slowly at my own pace, free of deadlines, free of judgment, free of anyone telling me what I should or shouldn't do. The telephone rang from time to time, sometimes a friend inviting me to join a book club meeting, sometimes a neighbor suggesting a short trip to the lakeshore, sometimes simply a voice checking in to ask how I was doing. Each ring was no longer a disruption, but a reminder that I was part of a community again, not just a man hidden in the shadow of family obligations. Tomorrow promised another photography expedition with Carol, my patient instructor turned dear companion. We would wander through the city with our cameras, capturing angles of resilience, in old brick walls, reflections of new hope in the glass of rebuilt towers. Afterward, lunch awaited at the senior center, where my hours of volunteering offered more than guidance. I offered empathy, living proof that dignity could be reclaimed even after betrayal. And next month, Florida. Sunshine, salt air, and reunions with colleagues from the Ford plant who had retired years before me. Men who had spent long afternoons fishing, swapping stories, and living lives of quiet freedom while I remained shackled by sacrifice. Now, finally, I was free to join them. Mary's photographs watched me from the windowsill, her smile eternal in frames, surrounded by flowers she once adored. The garden outside flourished because I finally had the time to nurture it, to give back to the earth the kind of patience it had always given me. Her presence lingered in every petal, every photograph, every corner of this house. Across town, I knew Michael was learning. Learning to pay his debts, to live within his means, to accept that respect cannot be stolen, but must be earned. For once, the balance between us felt right, not perfect, not healed, but right. I lifted my coffee cup toward the fading light, a silent toast to second chances, to justice that had been hard won, and to the quiet, sweet satisfaction of reclaiming a life I had once thought was gone forever. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel D Daily Stories, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.